So the topic of today is how can the design, implementation, and monitoring process of projects use a combination of modalities to maximize gender outcomes? This is the fourth in the webinar series that we have put together. And it is the culmination of research where many of you have contributed, or many of your organizations or colleagues have contributed. And today we're going to be showing off what you have contributed to and try to make sure that we can get this into the hands of the people that need to use it to improve the lives of crisis-affected populations. Next slide, please. So just a bit of housekeeping, as we all have been living on Zoom for the past year, we should know these rules. So this webinar should last about 75 minutes. You will all be muted in the presentation. You'll see on the bottom you have both a chat on the side and you have a possibility for where it says Q&A. If you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A. It's easier for us to curate. There will be a recording of this and we will send it out. And you can ask questions at the end of the panelists discussion, or you can ask anytime through the Q&A. So great to have you all here. Next slide, please. So what will we be doing today? We'll have a bit of an introduction. We'll talk about what the research found, and we'll have a conversation of what next. We have lots of guidance in the world, but we want to know then, how can we best use this? Then we open it up to you all as the panelists, as the participants, and then we'll have a closing. Next slide, please. We have 4 fabulous speakers who come and bring different perspectives as users of this type of information. First, we have Darren Ottenhoff Sr., who is a specialist in emergency food security, and he's working with the IDEAL project based in Mercy Corps. Sandy Dan Aoude, who is a cash and markets technical advisor. He's based in Niger. Ellie Sukup, who is a food security technical officer, and she supports the gender, youth, and social inclusion, also with the IDEAL project, also based in the US like Darren. And then last but certainly not least, we have Rosemary Samuel, who is a project manager in CARE Nigeria. And so they will be talking a bit to you about their observations on this, on the outputs. Next slide. So first, I'd like for us to be able to watch a bit of an overview and analysis of the findings that is shared with us from Key Aid, who did the research with us. Please go ahead, Reddy.
Hello, everyone. I have 15 minutes to talk you through what we found out when we search as to how we can maximize gender outcome in programs that use complementary or multimodal programming. By this, I mean programs that rely on cash and voucher assistance, plus an additional modality such as direct service delivery, in-kind distribution, or capacity building. We asked experts, we asked practitioners, and we also looked at the literature to answer our question as to how the design, the implementation, and the monitoring of such projects using a combination of modality can maximize gender outcomes. We identify 15 promising practices that I'm going to talk you through right now. And what I'm also going to present is opinion of practitioners who attended a series of learning workshops as to whatever they think these promising practices are relevant, but also feasible in humanitarian settings. So the first promising practices looked at the situation analysis stage, and underneath each of those promising practices, you will find the frequency at which we found them across literature, as well as the consensus it raised within the expert group. So the number one is to systematically do a gender and barrier analysis to inform the program design, and to do so in a sex, age, and disability disaggregated manner. While the number two is to make sure that women voices are heard and analyzed separately throughout the different assessments that you'll be conducting at situation analysis stage, such as the need assessment or the market assessment, security assessment, and so on. quite a high level of adherence vis-a-vis these two best practices, with a bit more reservation as to how realistic it is to implement them in humanitarian programs. If we move on to number 3, so number 3 is about making sure that you adopt a participatory approach to problem identification as well as problem solving when it comes to defining what should be the outcome of your program. And so here, similar trends with a high level of adherence and a bit more reservation as to how realistic that is. If we move from the situation analysis to the program design stage, so the first one is looking at targeting, and is about when you target women as part of such program, it is important that there is intentional space to engage the whole household. So that's what we call a woman plus approach. So targeting women, but also engaging with the whole family. And the promising practice number 5 is to make sure that there is a distinct analysis when it comes to the risk, opportunity, as well as relevance of using different modality for different activity, and to analyze this distinctly between men and women. For example, cash out cost could be different for men and women because they use different transport means. So it's important to capture this in a gender segregated manner. So a similar trend here in terms of how realistic it is. And it's quite interesting to see that as for the situation analysis stage, there is a bit of a concern at the response design stage as to how feasible it is to implement those best practices. And we'll see for implementation, which is the next steps, there is actually less discrepancy between the relevance and the operationalization or the perceived possible operationalization, which is rather positive because it means that it may be more difficult at program design or even at situation analysis stage, but that both in implementation as well as monitoring and evaluation, it seems more realistic to integrate those best practices. So it's the level of effort to put would be higher for situation analysis and program design. So the promising practice number 6, which is the first one for the implementation phase, is to integrate protection, equal access as part of the identification of the service providers, including financial service providers. And the promising practice number 7 is to make sure that you take upon advantage of peer review approach when raising awareness about how to use different delivery modality, but also how to do that when increasing awareness about what's the expected result of the program. This could have the added bonus to create some horizontal and vertical social capital for those who engage through those peer review group. So here you can see, as before, high level of adherence, and the perception as to how realistic it is to implement these best practices is always lower than the perceived relevance, but it tends to be higher than in the previous steps. Number 8 is to be sure to engage not only with the targeted household, as we've mentioned just before, but also with the overall community. First, maybe in a gender disaggregated manner, but then both men and women's group can also be merged to create joint discussion. The promising practice 9 focus on program that specifically includes gender outcome, and it's a reminder that it's important as well to engage male into promoting such outcome. Similar trend as to where the gap between relevance and feasibility tend to get smaller with implementation. If we move on to meal, so here is about the identification of indicators. So to use indicator to track both the intended as well as the unintended outcome, and to do that in a way that hear and analyze women and men's voice separately. While the promising practice 11 is about collecting data on gender outcome, but also about the perceived processes of distributing those different modalities, and to do so with the guidance of a gender focal person. And so you have here the perception of practitioner vis-a-vis relevance and feasibility. So quite high for the promising practice 10, and a bit lower for the promising practice 11, notably as a result of sometimes not having a gender focal person you can rely on for the collection of such data, collection and analysis. Number 12 is about making sure that when it comes to complaint and response mechanism, there is access, which is guaranteed through having multiple mechanisms, while at the same time, you do not segregate the complaint and response mechanism per the type of modality. So it's not good practice to have one hotline for how to use an ATM card, another complaint and response mechanism, which could be for the in-kind distribution part of your project. So there should be multiple mechanisms applicable across all the modality that your program use. And that's practitioner answer when it comes to relevance and feasibility. Looking at coordination, so there is something about supporting the capacity of institution that work in area that could impact gender outcome, even if it's not the primary purpose of your project. So institution working in the domains of health, nutrition, or sanitation. And in a similar trend, promising practice 14 is to look at how you could complement the work of social protection services through your program, even if it's, again, not directly aiming at doing so. While the promising practice 15 is just a reminder that there may be opportunities to develop synergy with programs that have specific and intended gender outcome that could help maximizing your own gender outcome within your program. And so here we can see that you think this is relevant, and as always, relevant, yes, but maybe a bit harder to operationalize. Thank you very much for watching this short Sinsetter video, and I hope you'll have interesting and vivid discussion as to what's next and how those promising practices identified could actually be put in practice in your respective context and throughout your respective program.
Thanks for that, Redit. We'll move on to the next slide, and I invite the panelists to turn on their videos so we can start the discussion.
Yeah, Red, what?
Okay, I almost see all of you. Now I see all of your wonderful faces. Great to have you guys here virtually. So we have two questions that will be coming to you, and you will each have a maximum of 5 minutes to be able to respond. Once you're getting towards the end, I'm going to show a little pink flag, so you'll know that you need to wrap up a little bit so we can have enough time to be able to have all of the panelists speak. So the first question that I have is, what strikes you about what we just saw, what Ellen presented to us? And we're going to start out with Darren. Over to you, Darren.
Thanks, Ali, and good morning and good evening to everyone. There's a few things that I noticed during this presentation and kind of the putting together all of the reporting points that were grabbed during this research effort. First off, I really appreciated how this report was put together. The biggest thing right away was how accessible this was. Reading through and seeing, each of these promising practices, it was organized in a way that allowed me to understand a conscious effort to help me understand, as I'm going along the project life cycle. Very key points within the project life cycle where there's an opportunity to have a considered point of disaggregation of unique needs or unique interest points for different groups within the project. There's several points in there when they talked about even starting out with the sex, age, disability disaggregation point of conducting that and starting your project design with that. That seemed like, of course, right. How would that not be how we start out things? And then to use the opportunity to talk about the frequency for how it is used, and then talk about how reasonable is that. And that's where it came back to reality of like, oh, right, sometimes that might be difficult to conduct right off the bat for various different reasons. So I really appreciated how this was put together so accessibly. And it became clear to me that it was very considered about looking at how you're going to organize how a project comes together. And focusing initially on that design, because that is where all of this began and where you start thinking about, okay, where is it that we do consider the unique needs of men, women, children, boys, girls, people living with disabilities and other considerations. So that is in there quite interestingly and simply for a person who's reading and trying to think about how they're putting together their program. Now, a couple of surprises, as I mentioned initially, was the, number one, having that disaggregation analysis in there and thinking to myself, of course that's going to be in there. And why don't we already do that? And then just seeing that, I don't want to say disconnect, but there's a separation of like what should be there and what is possible. Additionally, I really, really appreciated the specific practice number 4, and that is the Women Plus aspect. There's so often when I'm talking about food security projects, especially within the humanitarian realm, talking about gendered participants and trying to explain or think about, okay, it's not so simple as to look at a project and say 44% are boys, 56% are women and girls, because we look at the household. And so it's harder to break up the unit of analysis and the unit for how we put together our projects. And so that's why this Women Plus approach was really interesting to me. And I thought it took an issue that I continually run in my head into and looked at how it can do a better job of explaining and helping out our design process for ensuring that we are reaching each group uniquely and as effectively as possible. I think that covers what my initial observations were.
Great, Darren. Thanks so much. So you saw in it being accessible, you saw there were entry points for everyone, and this Women Plus one really struck you as a food security person. Great. Sunny, you come from a cash background, cash and markets background. What really strikes you about this report, about the findings, about what Ellen walked us through? Over to you.
Thank Holly for discussion and the colleague from KR Consulting for this important research and documentation, as well from Ideal Grant. So what I found, this report is very, very clear in terms of the way each parenthesis is the warning that was used, which is very clear. And I can imagine the effort that has been done to compress this important work up to 15 promising practices. I can imagine there is more than that. Looking at the different practices that were identified, I agree with Darren regarding the women voices on how it was highlighted here in this document, and as well as regarding, for example, the perception of the appreciation in terms of how reality is it. Which is for me should be a must, and we need to do our best to hear the women voices in order to achieve a greater gender outcome on that perspective. So I really appreciate the way that it is formulated, but for me it's an area that we need to explore, and how we can support organization and field practitioner, how to hear women voices within our program design and implementation. Another promising practice is that I was really asking what is about this discrepancy. It seems that we are okay to incorporate disaggregate that indicator in looking at the practices 10, but regarding on collecting this information to inform the indicator we selected, there is something what is missing. I'm asking what is happening. Why are we able to agree and to select some most appropriate indicator that are gender disaggregated, but we are still, we think that there is something is missing. It's not realistic to collect relevant information to inform this indicator.
Thanks, honey. Was that what you wanted? Is that everything you wanted to share?
Yeah, so one last point is related to financial service provider, how to incorporate some protection issue, gender issue on that, which is a critical element if you are looking with a cash and voucher assistance perspective, because for most of the time we are not considering these actors as in somehow as a humanitarian actor, so that they are not committed to respect some of our humanitarian principles. So I really appreciate the way that how this practice is highlighted in this way. So it's important not just for NGO to focus on gender and protection issue, but we need that our financial service provider committed on this aspect also.
Thanks, Sunny, for that. And really, the last part, a really critical aspect for us when we're looking at multimodal responses, because we need to have normally we have a financial service provider that will be assisting with the cash transfer or with the vouchers. And indeed, it was quite an undertaking to get down to the number of promising practices that we have there. I want to turn now to Ellie from a gender perspective and also from a youth perspective. What are some of the things that struck you about this report, about the findings, about what Ellen walked us through? Over to you, Ellie.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, first of all, I just want to commend CARE and Kiaid Consulting for tackling this and for putting this together. I was so struck by how relevant this is, and I will slightly selfishly, part of my role is to try and collect these promising practices. We want to make these promising practices accessible to the implementing community. And through IDEAL, we've been doing that through multiple ways. And I cannot tell you, in a sense, almost the relief that I had when reading through, this document and listening to Helene, because there was nothing from left field. There was nothing that particularly struck me as, oh, I would have never thought of that, or I've never heard that before. This is all very doable. This is all very applicable. And this is something that I think even implementing partners themselves already know. We have been hosting a variety of webinar events and application labs pertaining to COVID-19. I'm trying to capture these best practices. And we did one for looking at gender assessments in particular for development programs. We invited people to come and speak about what did you learn? What challenges did you have? What adaptations? And the advice that they had for other implementing partners were these promising practices 1 and 2 right off the bat, like collecting SAD, sex and age disaggregated data. I mean, as Darren said, of course, we know this, but sometimes it's easy to get caught up and not be able to do it, or we get ahead of ourselves, or we just don't take the time, or maybe resources are limited. I also appreciated Helene making that distinction between when she jumped from, the design stage to the implementation stage. And she called out, look, it will be more effort to do all of these things up front and incorporate it into the design stage, but that saves you so much time and effort and thinking down the line when you get to the implementation and monitoring stage. And that is something that we have continuously heard from implementing partners as well, is that yes, it's more challenging. It requires a lot of planning ahead. It requires, making sure you have the resources at hand, but it's so, so important. And so to see that reflected, in your work, it's almost like reassuring. All right, we're on the right path. I was also really happy to see, even from a youth perspective, as you said, that you called out protection issues, and that you put certain kind of benchmarks in place regarding, having CARM, so multiple reporting mechanisms at different levels, making sure that you engage not just women, but also men in different age groups, because they all come with different experiences and perspectives. So I really feel that this is very inclusive, and that you really covered all your bases. And I can only imagine how difficult it was to narrow it down to these promising practices. But from my perspective and what I've seen so far, I would say well done, because they're all spot on. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ellie. And for moving on to Rosemary, just to start out, the concept for this project came from a discussion from communities of practice, gender, cash, protection, and there was a real hunger from communities of practice to be able to do something that was useful for people in the field, for actual, program managers. And so from your perspective, as someone who is, working closely with crisis-affected populations, with populations that are facing, cyclical poverty, what is something that really struck you about this, about the findings, about the report, what Elaine shared with us? Over to you, Rosemary.
So hello everyone, and thanks for having me. I would say that the report, to me, it's very comprehensive, and then I would like to thank all those that participated and then put the report in together. For me, the first thing that struck me when I was going through the presentation by Helen was Promising Practice 15, that talked about mapping existing projects with intended gender outcomes. We found out that coming from my own perspective in Nigeria, most projects had been done without mapping. So there's not much coordination between actors. And then you find out that a particular site or a particular area gets more interventions more than others. And all this is because of coordination, or should I say lack of coordination, and it's mapping existing projects. The next one also that struck me is the SAD, that's Promising Practice 1, that talks about all data should be sex, age, and disability disaggregated. Yeah, most data you find out, you get that, yes, it's been disaggregated by sex, but when it comes to disability, that is where it's really, really lacking. So it's a good one for flagging that up. And then I feel it's a really good thing for us to start targeting it, because now most data you get that, yes, women and girls are being disaggregated, but disability, no. The next one that's really struck by this thing is holds gender disaggregated participatory community meetings. So most meetings, or should I say project launch or community meetings or review meetings that are being held, are being done collectively with the male and the female folks. And then from where I am, the women are, so to say, shy because they want to see more of men, or women are seen but can't really be heard. So, and then in that case, you find out that most of them have beautiful ideas that they want to share, but because the men folks dominate them, they don't really have or because they are shy, because of culture or religion, they can't really express themselves. So if we hold like a separate meetings for women, for gender, yeah, we can bring them together, but then they should be a separate meetings where they each group, and then even by gender, it should also be segregated because the girls cannot really freely talk in the presence of their mothers. And then also people also with disability cannot really say because they feel that with all the things that come with disability, they can't really express themselves. So I feel that's really good point. And then hearing women's voices separately. So that also links, that's promising practice too, also links to that one. So women's voices really have to be heard. And this has to be done collectively with all stakeholders. We should not put like, oh, you're just a woman, your voice should not be heard. And then even when you find out it's a woman's led project, you find out that the men actually make decisions for the women. So the women have to really come out and speak for themselves. They should say what they want and how they want it to be done. So I think that's a very good one. Then we also, on the case of carrying everyone along, or in terms of PSHEA, it's very good that it's not just, you find out in most organizations, they hold PSHEA trainings and everyone sign along, but when it comes to community members, do they know about it? Are they involved? So it should not be just project or organization people. The community have to be sensitized and they have to be aware of things like that. So that's it for me, Ola.
Excellent points. And I so appreciate you bringing it to reality. We know what good practices are, but when we sit down there with the women, with the men in our communities, sometimes there are these real barriers to be able to do what we know as community of practice are important. And I really appreciate how you were able to disaggregate out on, especially honing in on youth and what they add and how we can give them safe spaces, and for folks in our communities that have disabilities. And I love the idea of bringing it back out to the community, particularly on the points of protection. So important. We're going to move on to our next question. So on to the next slide. And I want us, as we're implementer-led, thank you so much for that. Who are we doing this for? We're doing this for crisis-affected populations. We're doing this for the communities that we're working in. And I want to center this on something that a dear friend of mine said was a practice of her supervisor, who unfortunately left us too soon in this world. Every time that they would have a team meeting, they would and sit together. When we used to be able to sit together in a room, he would leave an empty chair. And that empty chair would be for a community member whom he called Amina. And so when they were talking as a group, they were talking, they wanted to make sure that Amina was part of that conversation. So she understood what our intentions were and how we were going to be working with her and her communities to help improve their lives, because that's what our intention is. So on the next question, I want to ask how, knowing what you know, what we have shared, what has been shared across these communities of practice through this document, through these videos, through these conversations, how is this going to change your practice, and knowing that Amina has a seat at the table and that she's listening to us? So first, we're going to start out with Ellie for that conversation. Over to you, Ellie.
Oh, thank you so much. So I have the wonderful job and role of working particularly with these implementing communities, with these implementing partners who work very closely with the Aminas of the world. And my job is to try and make their job not only easier, but really to facilitate that sharing with one another, because you all hold the answers. You know, you are the experts in the room. And so I find this to be incredibly timely because in December, I finished a workshop series looking at gender assessments in development or resilience food security activities. And we're trying to come up with kind of a tip sheet, or a cheat sheet almost of, we know all these things, but implementing is hard. You know, when it comes right down to it, you know, life can be messy. And so how do you mitigate all those challenges? How do you create those adaptations on the fly? And I'm thinking, as in my role, how can I help you do your job better? And so this is something that will absolutely go in, you know, that resource document, that cheat sheet, an overall brief that we want to be accessible to all implementing partners out there, because they are the ones working with the communities. So I don't have much more to say on that, just other than this is incredibly timely. And I really look forward to working with everyone at the Food Security Nutrition Network to promote this. And I look forward to hearing that feedback from implementing partners as well, as to, you know, are they using this tip sheet? Is it working for them? What do they recommend? Do they need to adapt it? If so, how are they doing it? You know, and adapting it to the context that they are working in. I'm really hoping to capture that information. Thank you.
Great, really important that we can put it out there, place it in different places. And I love the part about feedback, Ellie, super important. Moving to you, Sunny. So you're relatively close to folks in the field, although we're not able to travel so much, but you know, how is this going to impact what you're doing to improve the lives of folks like Amina, or maybe Aminatu in your case, from a cash perspective? Over to you.
Okay, thankfully for this question. Yes, without challenging our practices, how we will work to ensure to improve life of people like Aminata. So just the first important thing that's regarding these different practices that's it's important to focus on. It's for me, it's important to improve our preparedness, looking at an humanitarian perspective, because regarding what Helen shared in terms of the level of effort that is required during the situation analysis and the design is more than when we are in the implementation in terms of implementing this practice. So for us, it's important to understand the context really and have specific discussion with people like Aminata before the crisis hit, so that we will have enough information, enough data that can help us to design our program in a way that will improve and save life and improve the livelihood of affected people. So that is an important way, and so we need to put place system and process in place that will help us to understand more the context, discuss with the affected population before the emergency, so that we will save time in the design phase, and we can be sure that we are able to put in place and practice these promising practices. Next point for me is not just to say, yes, we have incorporated some specific practices to promote gender outcome, but it's important to measure this practice. What is highlighted, as you can remember, we have this huge discrepancy between the practice in 10, where experts agree that it's relevant, but we lack some, we did not make effort to collect and aggregate data as well as analyze it and share it with community to ensure that how are we reflecting what could be committed to do as the design phase of our program, which for me is critical. Yes, to incorporate the indicator, but we need to collect data, analyze them, and come back to community and discuss on this information collected and how we can improve it together.
Thanks so much, Samik, for that. I really appreciate the thinking of preparedness and engaging with the communities as a critical step for our work, particularly when we're looking at how do we have combinations of modalities, right? Because situations can change, especially when we're in places where we have ongoing crisis or we have a chronic acute crisis. And so how people could access and be their opportunities, they could really change over time. So thank you for that. We're going to move on from a perspective of food security to Darren. And you and I are a little bit far from the folks that we normally are able to serve, but we still are there, surfing in our way. How is this going to impact how you are going to be working in your field to make sure that we are improving the lives of folks like Amina and her community? Over to you. Sure,
thanks, Holly. And I see this in a couple different ways. And I guess I'll start out by pointing out that one interesting thing I noted in this report and discussion was it identified one of the key problems and barriers to having these improved gender outcomes without specifically saying it. And in that I saw where it was in practice 11, where they talked about working through the gender focal person. And as I read, I was like, gender focal person? I've worked in so many food security projects and there's never a gender focal person. And then it hit me like, well, I mean, here's what we have to do. So many projects we work in, it might be an issue of budgeting, of prioritization, of what's available, but we don't have that person who can kind of define these roles and how to design around these considerations. And so with this kind of tip sheet, with this report, it allows us all to become a gender focal person. It builds our capacities as implementers, all of us who are on this discussion right now, all of us who are in this webinar, to improve our ability to understand what is needed on the ground with our participants. It allows us to see each area where we can consider their needs and allows us the opportunity to take into consideration the specific needs of our participants, and it builds our capacities so that we might not need a specific dedicated person. Well, we probably do need a specific dedicated person, but when they're not available, that we can step in whatever role we're doing, we are making sure that these considerations are laid into the project design, the project implementation, and how we talk about what we're accomplishing in this program. The other aspect I think that this will be very helpful is outside of us, the implementers, start thinking about the participants, the people that we are working with, the Aminas. This does a great job of identifying everyone as an Amina. We talk about, households, we talk about the participants who are going to be cashing out their projects. We think about providers and vendors. We think about how each of these people, each of these groups are a part of the process, and each of these people have a place at the table for these discussions. And in the food security realm, I mean, it's such a wide array of aspects that you need to take into consideration and actors that are involved. And this allows us to consider each of these people and build their capacities to be a part of a household's food security situation. Ensure that everyone's a part of the community that we're working with. And so I think that that's allows us, I think the way that this is put together allows us to think through that and how we're going to reach each of those actors, each of those participants, and make sure that everyone has the ability to be a part of the process of food security at the household level. I think those are the two key areas that I looked at that will kind of help me think about how we're moving forward and how we can improve what we do.
Great, thanks so much. I think that, you know, it would be wonderful if we all had gender advisors in our programs in CARE. We're kind of lucky to usually have those, but, you know, we do need to do good enough on behalf of our communities, and I appreciate that comment there, Darren. I'm going to give the last word on my round of questions to Rosemary, who is much closer to Amina's and Aminatas and Aminatus in their communities. So how is this going to change what you're going to be able to do, Rosemary? Over to you.
For me, we'll start with coordination with other actors. So there should be much coordination or more coordination so that projects will not be duplicated. And then when it comes to the community members, stakeholders, we have to build their capacity as it relates to gender. And then it will not just be, it's not just community leaders, but everyone should be involved. We talk also about military. The military too has to really be sensitized, because when we talk about CVA, usually the community members, like in Nigeria, we have problem moving cash or goods. So the security personnel needs to really be enlightened and sensitized. And then as it relates to gender. And then there should be more advocacy for local vendors to participate, especially women. Because mostly when you look at local vendors, they are usually men. So women have to also be encouraged to participate. And then how do we do that? We also need to empower them. So empowerment, not just in, okay, I'm giving you cash or start a business or something so that you will be able to grow. When your business grows, then you become a vendor. No, from little savings, you can start. So we need to really encourage them to think big and start small and then act now. And then also more monitoring on projects. And then we really need our community participants, we need to really inform them of our projects or programming. We need to tell them at each state where we are and where we are going. So we have to be really accountable, not to the donors, but also to the community participants. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much for that, Rosemary. I heard a lot of the good practices that you are asking and making a call to action. And I really, you know, some of the more difficult actors that we know that are part of our ecosystem, of our landscape of the work that we're doing. Now I'm going to turn to some questions from the participants. I have a few here and I'm going to field them out to you guys. And so I'm going to throw out two, and any of you can come off mute and say what, you know, to respond to them. So the first question I have here is from Grace, and she says, there have been ongoing discussions on diversity and inclusion. What best practice would one recommend to make that it is a reality in projects, taking into consideration the diverse social groups and communities? Our communities are not monolithic, right? So what are some of the, excuse me, a good practice that you can hear either from you know, the research itself or something that you have seen? And then another one that we have is from Kawani Kuich. And they say women and girls living in the remote areas of South Sudan are illiterate, whereas they might not know their right in order to participate in the project implementation. What assistance can we give them? And I think this question speaks rather largely. It's not just South Sudan, unfortunately, where we find ourselves in that case. And it is many of our contexts where for women or certain groups of women have less access to education and have lower levels of literacy. So I throw that out to any of you. Please feel free to come off of mute and answer either one of those questions with some thoughts that you have.
I can go ahead and get us started. I'd like an opportunity to actually speak to both of those. Those were very good questions and big considerations for us to think about as we're putting our projects together. And just upon the idea of kind of looking at diversity and inclusion within our projects. And yeah, that is something we definitely need to consider from the get-go. And just a smaller aspect of something to think about that was brought out in this report was the talking about the peer groups, working through peer groups. And that's starting off, it's an organic way to work through kind of already constructions of the community, which by themselves frequently won't be diverse and inclusive on their own, but it also allows you a kind of a baseline to understand where those lines may be. And then as you kind of move out from that, understanding if you are working in a realm and you are understanding where there is some less equity amongst the groups, that's kind of where you can build into. And I think you have the opportunity to recognize those through what the community groups, the peer groups that you may already be working with, if those were put together by the community. And then the second question was, understanding rights. And that is something we run into in so many different places. And I think that that's an approach that understanding maybe where those rights are not possessed by some of the participants as you're doing your community outreach, and understanding where you can bring about some of the discussions of understanding how participants in the question that you mentioned, women who might be illiterate, who don't understand some of the things that they may have access to, and working through the communities to build those understandings. And if it's possible to design that into the project so that it can be something that that you're able to achieve in an acceptable way, that it's really something that is a success to your project. And it does take a little bit more effort and a little bit understanding at the beginning of everything. And there's no one fix all for that situation across the board. But it's something that if you have the consideration while you're doing your design portion, that can help you achieve a little bit more and kind of bring that to the participants and allow them to kind of grasp a little bit more of their rights, I guess.
Other panelists want to address? Go ahead, Sonny.
Hello, just thankfully for the next question on women and girls in remote area, that can be in South Sudan, Northeast Nigeria, or normally, or even in Syria. So for me, it's also important as a international organization or national organization to think or build a strong partnership with local organizations which can be more familiar, more legitimate to defend or to work against Aminata or any women or girls in her local context. So it is important to build a strong partnership with local organizations that can be mostly women-led organization. It's very critical for us. In some contexts, it's very challenging, but for me, it's important as organization, international organization, to trust this local organization and build their capacity so that we can work together and improve, save lives and of affected population. It's for me what I will suggest regarding the issue in remote working in remote area. It's important to build a strong partnership with local organization.
Thanks so much for that, Sonny, and absolutely. I think Rosemary, you wanted to add something. You're still on mute. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so for me, right from to address the question where it says women and girls who are living in remote areas don't really know their rights, right from the project and design, And then implementation, the community members, or they really need to know what specifically your project is, or the intervention it's all about. They need to know what their rights are as it relates to the project, or their rights as then we need to also sensitize them as about the project. And then some also women, when you talk about feedback, they need to give you feedback. Some we can't write. That is where the role of the community engagement officers, they have to go around if you need to, they need to be more enlightened, or you need to write for them so that they can be able to give their feedback and then you write. For communities that don't have like telephones to call, the hotlines, or anywhere to call, I think it's also a way where you can be able to go from door to door to collect their feedbacks, and then also to hear from them their views. And then another way you can do it is for those that are not literate, you need to, through radio programming, you need to put your jingles where you, when you do your programming or your radio jingles, you need to, some of these things, their rights have to also be mentioned. And then the most important thing is also when we are designing, we should ensure that community or local people that speak the local language are part of the project team. Because it's one thing if somebody is speaking Swahili, and as I come as an expert and I speak English, the person doesn't understand the language. So people that are in projects have to understand the local language so that the beneficiaries can also be welcome them, and then they can be able to really know what the project is all about. So I think it's really important for local language, people that understand the local language should be part of the project.
Absolutely, and hallelujah to that, Rosemary. Let people feel comfortable in the language that they feel comfortable in. Ellie, did you want to add something to this?
I did. I wanted to actually address the first question about diversity and inclusion. And I believe that this needs to be addressed at all levels. Starting from what I've heard from different implementing partners. There was an example that someone gave in Bangladesh when they were trying to collect data and they were interviewing young girls. They found that depending on who was asking the questions, they would get different responses. And I know Rosemary touched on this, earlier as well. And so I think being aware of the context that you are working in order to make sure that that everyone's voice is heard and that it's accurately represented is so important. And a lot of times that requires extra work. In this case for Bangladesh, it was young girls felt that because it was a man asking the question that they needed to either directly respond back or repeat back what they were being asked, or that they were trying to answer in a way that they thought would please, the person asking those questions. And that's not uncommon. But also in terms of capturing that information, even we at Ideal, we're not, working on a country level on a day-by-day basis. I work here from Washington, D.C., but that doesn't mean that we don't have our own reckoning to do in terms of diversity and inclusion. We are having active discussions about, are we making sure that the right voices are being heard? Are we representing? Are we facilitating that conversation, in an equitable manner? How can we elevate the voices of those that don't get heard and kind of get drowned out? Are we helping or hindering that process? And so I think that no matter at what level you are, whether you are the one that's collecting the data on the ground, or whether you're sitting in your office in Washington, D.C. or whatever global office, that we really need to turn inward and look at our own processes to make sure that we are practicing what we preach.
Thanks so much for that, Ellie, and really appreciate that, and making sure that when we're looking about diversity and inclusion, it's not only within the communities that we're working with and working for, but it's within our own teams, right? And so who within our teams has say, has input, and where they're able, and those safe spaces that they have to be able to do that. We have about, I'd say about 7 minutes left, but I'm going to go 2 questions to you guys. So if you can try to keep your responses a bit brief, and see if you have any responses to them. So Delilah has a question for us, which was related to promising practice 7. And she said that it sounded interesting. I don't remember what it was off the top of my head, but I think it was about pure methodology. So what she asked is if we knew about any methodologies that have been used to raise awareness and to give feedback on modalities. So how do you have any experiences from that of how you have been able to understand the types of modalities we're using, whether in-kind cash or service delivery through feedback mechanisms? And then I might say it wrong, but sorry, Cheering, Choden has asked a question about looking at targeting female-headed households. I'm going to take a little bit of liberty with this one, but the question is, did the project look specifically at targeting female-headed households since they are amongst the most vulnerable in developing country contexts? I want to kind of expand that question and say, when we're looking at finding positive gender outcomes in the work that we're doing for food security programming, do you find that to be true, or do you find that to be that there's something else that we need to unpack there? So 2 questions there about targeting female-headed households as the most vulnerable, and the other is on feedback mechanisms on the modalities. So to any of you who might have something to add. We may have been stumped by those questions. Sunny, do you want to go ahead and try to?
Yeah, so I want to go just, but the next, it's more to highlight for me the relevance of this promoting practices regarding my experience. Some area ago during our assessments for a cat and water assistance project that only targets women-headed household for a specific context. So what's happened? Unfortunately, there is not enough data regarding what's happening in terms of some specific gender issue, but during the research, we found that there is no clear information or a discussion with men on what lead to the choices to select only women-headed household to provide them cash flow. So demonstrating that it's critical. Yes, it's possible when we set some common principle or discussion before the targeting process to sensitize, explain what is the purpose of providing cash to women-headed household. That can be in combination with when targeting also men, but can be specific to women. So it's more for me about the importance to have a clear discussion within the community before deciding on such kind of targeting, instead of providing clear advice on how to do it. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Sunny. I'm going to do one last question from my own as the moderator. One of the things that really struck me in this process was that we saw a big gap between the available literature and then what people say is promising practice, right? And so my question is, why is there such a big gap? And what can we do to be able to make sure that if another review was done, that there would be more consensus on what we're doing and what we think we should be doing. So really quickly, maybe in 1 minute from each of you on that one.
Shall I start?
Please do, Sunny.
Yeah, so I will say if you can apply the promising practice number 11, so we will have more documentation so we can assess whether these are promising processes and we can get more practice. Yeah. Collecting data. Yeah.
Excellent. I love it. Ellie, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you say in 1 minute or less?
Yeah, I think that this is exactly what we're hoping to capture as part of Ideal. I think that trusting yourself that we see the IPs, you are the experts, you know best. And so that it should be, if we can capture what you are doing, how you are adapting, how you are responding to these challenges, then that in of itself that's what the literature should be based on, because you know best and you're the ones who are actually doing it.
Great. So a call to action there. Rosemary, what would you say? Your parting words in 1 minute or less.
For me, it's going back to the drawing board, looking at the promising practice. Where are we? What needs to be done? What needs to be changed? What needs to be added or removed or improved on? So that's it for me.
Thanks, Rosemary. Darren, you get the last word on the panel.
Yikes. Okay, I guess there's that interesting point of, in this industry that we work in, that we just feel that there's a oversaturation of tools, of articles, of everything, and yet we can never find exactly what we need. And so that's to that point. I constantly just updating and doing the things, recognizing where we have gaps and filling those in. Always remembering, like, if you just assume it's out there but can't find it, maybe something needs to be talked about and brought to attention of something else to be brought out that someone else is looking for. So there's always need for additional looking into or analysis of what's available for implementers. So that's, I say if you're working, you don't see something that would help you out, or you think someone in a similar situation would be useful, it's look for a little while, but also there's something else to be done to bring to the wider community.
Thanks so much. And with that, I thank all of the panelists for your time. You're welcome to turn off your cameras. I'm going to keep mine on. Redit, if we can move on to the last slide. And so we have put the links to the documents online. You can find them on the hyperlink that's been put in the chat. Also, when you will get this presentation at the end, there is the full report, which is available in English, which goes through the whole methodology. We know that a 50-page document is not always very accessible to everyone, and so we have made the tip sheet. It is available in Arabic, in French, in Spanish, and French. So we hope that those are accessible to some folks, to more folks, so that those are languages that they feel comfortable with. They're available for your download now. And absolutely, we are interested in your feedback on them, your application of them. I'm sure that the folks in Ideal who have funded this will be thrilled to be able to have that. And so we do encourage you to be able to use them. This work is contributing to the Gender and Cash sub-working group of the Cash Workstream of the Grand Bargain. And so we're hoping that this is also going to reach people where they are and improve their practice. So with that, I want to say thank you all for your time, your interest, and looking forward to being able to hear from you in the future. Have a wonderful day, evening, and afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.